All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
Thank you, everybody. I feel so lifted and gratified and otherwise buoyed by your recorded applause. Albert, thank you for being here. Now, tell me, as we do every show, what technically is wrong. You can't hear me right now. Something's too hot. Something's not. Everything is good. Albert gives me the thumbs up, which is the universal sign for all being good.
Albert, thank you.
Kim is here as well.
Kim, how are you?
To chit us into another great day. I am excited. I will tell you, I have watched parts of the show, and thanks to Michael Schur and thanks to Albert, Kim, and Tony for supporting during the time I was away. Very impressed with a lot of the stuff that went down. And today's show, if I had to come back for one, and I'm coming back for more than one, but just this first one is spectacular. I have a guest on today that I've been wanting to get for some time, Dr. Stephen Hassan. And he is a cult expert. He himself, yes, he was in a cult, and now he's become one of the leading experts on deprogramming in all of America. So he will join us in just a few minutes. I think in about 20 minutes we'll have him on in this first hour. Then in the second hour, the brilliant legal analyst David Katz joins us, and David has a lot on the platter because one of the legal moves that the new president made was to pardon all of the January 6 marauders, rioters, who violently attacked the Capitol and who occupied that space. They are all free. These are dangerously violent people who were involved in every manner of attack on police officers and on the institution of Congress. And so it's a remarkable thing that they have been freed. And I'll give you more on that as we continue. I mean, it's on brand for the new Trump. Trump Part 2 is sort of the old thing, I'm coming back, and this time no more Mr. Nice Guy. I mean, that's kind of where he is. Like you felt like he was the Wicked Witch of the West before. This is really going to make that look like a tea party. But I'll get to that and speak about it in, I think, the terms and in the framework that it really needs to be spoken of. And I'll do that in just a few minutes. I did want to address an ongoing, I have two thoughts that I wanted to address. One of which is, I know that we have a reputation of starting a little after the top of the hour, which we do. But that isn't a thing that we do by design. We accidentally or oftentimes end up having to start after the top of the hour. And the reason we do that is because we're scrambling. I think I've made this point before, but let me just underscore it again, for video or for some organizational thing, or oftentimes a technical last-minute issue. Computers crash, we lose video, whatever it might be. So is Michael Schur on vacation again? Who's this Mark Thompson guy? Exactly, Trevor Starr in Hollywood. Thank you for the 1010. I know Michael was terrific. But here is my point. You guys, the audience, the regulars here, you somehow have created this mythology that the show is supposed to start late. And what's happened is it has entered the consciousness of Kim and Albert and Tony and the fill-in host. So all of a sudden, when he starts at 10 after, he thinks he's sticking the landing. That's not the idea here. We're not trying to start late. We're trying to start on time.
Why are you yelling?
So the idea is, please don't encourage bad behavior, is what I'm asking my audience.
They do this to me all the time. I don't know what the hell they do it for.
Exactly. And I also blame the producer, of course.
Whoever is producing this thing
exactly.
has no idea what they're doing.
Hey, it's your responsibility to tell him, hey, I know it's fun, but we're really supposed to start on time. So, but I partially blame, I think the audience encouraged it, Kim. I really do. I think the audience kind of cheered him on. He saw that the show was supposed to start whenever you start it, Mark. Nullifidian, again, we need more of that. We need more of the whenever you want, Mark. We need more of that on this show. Mark starts prepping 10 minutes earlier, and you can get on the air by 11. Let me tell you something, Jim Shields. How dare you, first of all, that you would suggest that if I start prepping 10 minutes earlier, I can get on time. I'm in a constant state of prepping. I mean, if you were to shadow me for a day, you go, I can't believe this. This guy, all he does is prep. There's no off switch on Mark Thompson, all right? And that's all I'm trying to say to you, Jim. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I used that excuse in high school, and I was still Mark Tardy. Exactly. I don't know what excuse that was. Last minute. Start whenever you want. It's your show. We will muddle through somehow. Thank you, Blue Spark. All right.
The Mark Thompson Show.
California is where our show originates. We're a 2-hour live show. We're 11 to 1 on the West Coast. We're 2 to 4 on the East Coast. And we welcome listeners and viewers from America and from all around the world. One of the things that's happening in our host state, California, is we're having a real battle with nature. And nature has left us this wonderful, most lovable environment we call California. It is filled with dramatic topography, mountains and gorgeous valleys, the ocean, which is, of course, home to so many of the terrific beaches that line the coast. And I personally am drunk on California. I love California. I love every part of California. I love the culture of California, the way it's incubated free speech and forward thinking. And oftentimes many of the trends that build nationwide start here in California. And for all those reasons, and more, I find it so heartbreaking to see California in the state that we're in now. And of course, our big cities have had big city issues with homelessness and crime, etc. But now nature has produced this remarkably difficult situation for us, devastating, honestly. And we as Californians live with an anxiety about more devastation, and it's not over. And I mention this because I want to just quickly address what's happening now in terms of fires, and will continue to, because this is my home, and it's also home to a lot that is important to America. So with that super lengthy preamble, I want to ask you, Kim, what's happening today with the fires in Southern California?
Well, we have a new fire. It's called the Hughes Fire, Hughes, Hughes Fire. And it's in the mountains north of Los Angeles. Started yesterday near Castaic, which if you've driven on I-5, you know where that is on the Grapevine. Spread to more than 10,000 acres. More than 30,000 people are under evacuation orders, so they've had to pack up and leave. It's burned more than 10,000 acres. Again, the fire is now 14% contained, and I-5 through Castaic has reopened. There's also another new fire. This one is burning in Camarillo. That is forcing the evacuation of a university. So there's new fires cropping up in the Southern California area, and this wildfire event for a January is not over.
And I should mention that nature, as I noted, has presented a very difficult situation for those of us who've built a society on top of this wonderful, dramatic natural landscape. But it's not a landscape that necessarily can be home to all of the development that we've done. Now, that doesn't stop us, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but we should be aware that there is a disconnect between the way nature proceeds and the way we have proceeded in society. And so to cut to the chase, I would simply say that this is a de facto desert in Southern California. I mean, the rainfall totals are, there's just a paucity of rainfall in Southern California generally. Now, we've had two very very wet years. One, I think, with 200% of rain, maybe even north of that. And then last year, I think 150% of normal rainfall. And that has built this brush. But then you get back to the nature part of it. And now the drought conditions that have persisted in Southern California make all of that so tinder dry that we are looking at these fires cropping up with very, very little ignition. You add to that the human factor, which is filled with arsonists who I believe they should lock them up and throw away the key. And then the opportunists who move into many of these regions that have been evacuated and they loot, and you end up with these stories within the story. But just on the fire itself, Castaic has a lake there, right? Lake Castaic. Yeah. And you hope that there are opportunities there to grab that water. You know, it's a if you will, it's a place where you can grab water and hit the fire quickly, and I hope that they're able to do that. There's supposed to be rain this weekend in Southern California. I don't know if we'll see those forecasts come to pass, but it would be terrific to get some. But obviously, with all of the burn areas now scarring landscapes across Southern California, too much rain leads to mudslides. And so, I mean, the natural course of things make life really tough. And then finally, the politics of it. Donald Trump supposedly is coming to California, the new president, tomorrow. He has a beef with California because California isn't a state that he carried. He views it as generally a blue state. Of course, that's not the case in California. There are blue cities and there are blue concentrations of population. I mean, immense concentrations. But the most of the state, if you just want to look at acreage, is probably red. You know, Central Valley up to the north, et cetera. But those aren't the prevailing populations. But I'm just saying that that's the acreage we're talking about. So we'll see what Trump does. He's talked about all kinds of strings attached. He clearly doesn't like California. His most recent remarks is, I think states should take care of themselves on this stuff. They shouldn't come to the federal government for help. Well, this just in. We pay into the federal government. We pay in much, much more than we are getting out.
Right. If that's the case, give us our money back.
Thank you.
All of it.
Tennessee, Kentucky, Louisiana, Oklahoma, the Carolinas, the Dakotas. I can continue. They all are welfare states. They get more from the government than they pay in. We in California, we send you all the rent money, man. So you're way out of line when you make comments like the one you've made. Like the state should just take care of it themselves. Great. Then we're not going to send any more rent money. We'll need it to take care of ourselves. But it's just not the way the federal government is set up in the United States of America is set up. I suspect that Donald Trump doesn't even know what I've just said, meaning he isn't aware of it. He's, let's face it, he doesn't know much. He has a 1950s rich kid view of the world. So, but he is coming to California to address the fire issue. So that's the word from California as we continue. And I just wanted to kind of take a stock of the state of the state when it comes to the fires. So,
The Mark Thompson Show.
I will tell you, Kim, I am enjoying from my new mug, which I got from our website, getmarkmerch.com. I'm enjoying the Coachella Valley coffee, which I didn't have a chance to actually sample while I was away. When I'm away, they don't have the Coachella Valley.
We could try ignoring it, sir.
No, we could try ignoring it, sir. This is
pretty nice to be home, if only to get your coffee.
Yeah, we could try ignoring it. Sir is actually on the on the coffee mug.
What's in the cup?
I'm missing my music. I've got on the you do have the music. All right, sorry. Magnificent Coachella Valley coffee. Oh my God. The Coachella Valley coffee is I went with the Colombian.
Oh.
But you should go to their website and look. They have tasting notes for all of their coffees and their teas. So they're really good descriptions. You can get a medium roast, a lighter roast, a richer roast, darker roast, etc. And it's all fresh crop. These are not beans that have been lying around for months and then discounted on the internet. You can get those. You can get bags of coffee discounted. But the reality is those have been sitting around a while. This is rich, fresh coffee, and it's the best coffee I've ever tasted. Find the blend that works for you. Find the roast that works for you. It's CoachellaValleyCoffee.com, and Mark T at checkout will get you 10% off. And if you're lucky enough to drink it from one of our so good.
Nice
If
to
you're
see
lucky
you
enough
enjoying life again, really.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
I'm back to enjoyment.
Mhm.
So good luck getting one of our mugs and drinking some of our coffee and enjoying life as we do.
The Mark Thompson Show.
All right, I'm going to get into it. Before Dr. Stephen Hassan gets here, I wanted to quickly address something. Here's a show item, Albert, and this involves you. And it involves Tony, who's not here. This is from, who's it from, Kim?
Mark S.
Mark S. writes, Hi, Mark. I hope this finds you and yours well. By the way, solid way to begin any email. I am primarily a listener in delay, almost always on Apple Podcasts. The most recent show that I can find on Apple is 11725, which is a...
What?
I know. That's what I said. Are you not adding shows to Apple anymore? Let me know if you can, please. And keep up the great work on your awesome show. Thanks. I turn to you, Albert. Was there some hiccup that would prevent our podcast from going up? He says there's been nothing posted since 11725, sir. What do you have to say?
No, I'm just going to scroll to this page here and show that it has been updated in Apple Podcasts. So you might have to just update your iOS, maybe.
Oh yeah, update your iOS, Mark S.
Or your just your iPhone, because we have been posting it. Also, I wasn't working on those days.
Yes. So Albert is technically not responsible.
Thanks, Tony.
But he does bring up. Oftentimes he's left to clean up the mess left by others, but in this case there was no mess. You're saying it was fine. Yeah. All right.
Albert, thank you.
Yeah,
This
thank you
doesn't
for
appear
that.
to be a Mark Thompson show problem, especially not an Albert problem. This is a Mark S problem. Is that right? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Kim is saying Mark.
Hey, which one do you use, Mark Thompson?
Which get your act together.
I blame you.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Well, it's all right. Albert, I have a question for you. I really want to get to Dr. Stephen Hassan because I think his work's amazing and we're going to have a great conversation. Can I put off Law and Disorder until after?
Yes, I think we should. We have Law and Disorder and maybe a time for Chunk of Trump right before David Katz.
I do want to say this to those who are listening and looking in. I'm deeply disturbed by the pardons that have been issued by the new president. The pardons issued to his J6ers, those who violently attacked police officers and the Capitol. They went up there with zip ties, with stun guns. They literally almost beat to death that day several police officers, those who were just there charged with protecting the Capitol and just doing their job. And now you end up with this sweeping pardon of all of these people and a recasting of that day in some perverted way as a day of freedom, a day of support for this president. So I will get into that in a big way after my conversation with Dr. Stephen Hassan, but I do want to talk to him. And I will also, when we get into it, play for you the reaction of one of the police officers who was almost beaten to death, to see his country, in effect, desert him. These are tried and convicted by Trump judges. These are tried and convicted criminals, violent criminals who've been released. And make no mistake about it, and I'll make this point again and again, these are Trump's brown shirts. These are those that he can count on to intimidate the opposition. Intimidate the opposition on Capitol Hill, intimidate the opposition in media, intimidate the opposition in the public. So there's a plan here. The despicable aspect of the pardon is only one layer of the grotesque narrative that is to follow, and I will speak about it in detail. Smash the like button if you would. It's the YouTube thing, you know. In YouTube, it matters. You got to hit the smash it. And I also want to thank you for sharing the show. You share a segment, you may share the conversation I'm going to have with Dr. Stephen Hassan, and you'll be able to help us grow the footprint of the show, and I really appreciate that. So we continue.
The Mark Thompson Show.
It's a remarkable thing when we can get a guest on here that is just someone who I've really wanted to talk to for so very long. He is a mental health professional, but that really doesn't come close to describing the rich history of Dr. Stephen Hassan. He is an expert in deprogramming those who have been sucked in by cults. So the world of cults and cultism is something as old as time, I'm sure, but we've seen it in the modern age take on all of these different faces. And our guest is someone who he himself was sucked into one of those cults. I think he was a Mooney. Well, I want to hear more about that. But more to the point, he is a studied researcher in deprogramming those who are part of cults. And he's written several books on the subject of mind control. He's considered an expert on mind control and on cults. And this brings us to today, he's written a book on the cult of Trump. How about it for Dr. Stephen Hassan? Hello, sir.
Pleasure to be here.
I am such a fan of your work, and I've looked forward to talking to you since we got the word that you were going to be joining us. So I want to jump right in quickly, and if you wouldn't mind just addressing my curiosity. It was the Moonies, right?
Yes. I was at Queens College. I should say I grew up in Flushing, Queens, New York, 1.3 miles from Donald Trump's childhood home. So I'm very familiar with Donald Trump my whole life. And I got deceptively recruited at Queens College into the Moonies and nearly died in a sleep deprivation van accident after 2.5 years of leadership. And that led to a deprogramming where I was so sure I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed that I accepted my father's tearful plea to listen to the ex-members. And then I learned about Chinese communist brainwashing criteria, and the lights started to turn on in my head.
Before I leave that, it sounds to me like that was the one event, the van event to which you've referred, that might have, was the cold slap in the face. But what were some of the ways in which you were just drawn in so deeply to the point that you were pushing back on those who were saying, hey, man, you're in a cult. This is a cult you're in.
Yeah, it's, nobody thinks that they could ever be in a cult. You think weak, stupid people, uneducated people. I was none of those. My vulnerability was my girlfriend dumped me and I was lonely, and the spring semester was starting, and 3 women pretending to be college students asked to share my table and started asking me a lot of personal questions and flirting with me. And I had no idea. In fact, they lied to me. I said, are you students? Yes, they weren't. Are you part of a religious group? No, not at all. They were. But it was a systematic social influence process. And it was really not anything. I'm not a joint. I was never a joiner. I wasn't interested in dropping out of school and throwing out all my poetry. I was a creative writing major. But
Was it, Steve, was it cool to be in it? Like at the beginning, is that it? I mean, is that how you get drawn? Because like, yeah, I'm part of this group, as you say, you might have been looking for companionship or whatever. I kind of feel like you're kind of excited about joining something in the beginning. Am I right?
Mark, 2020 hindsight, it's, now 50, more than 50 years ago that I had this experience at age 19. And I really just was too filled of myself with my ego that I was an extra honor student. And even though they lied, and then when I found out they were lying, I accepted their BS explanations instead of going, wait a minute, if a group is legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. And back then there was no information about the Moonies anywhere.
Right.
And this is way before the internet got created. So, and essentially, I think in the end, I was hypnotized and brainwashed. My brain was hacked, and I was not able to reality test. And my family and friends did all the wrong things, which is what's happening today with folks who've been radicalized. They tried to argue me out. They tried to persuade me with facts, and they didn't understand the nature of the hacking, which was that I was programmed to reject any attacks on the leader, the doctrine, or the policy, but as evil, as evil spirits or demonic. Even though I was Jewish and I didn't believe in that a few weeks previously, it was filled in my mind. And so what they should have done was say, hey, if you're going to make a commitment to a group and drop out of school, let's take a time out and let's research it together. That would have worked. My mother did say, let's talk to the rabbi, which I did. And he was clueless. What he should have said to me, Mark, is, I've never heard of this group, but I'm telling you, if it's legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. So please don't go back. Don't talk to them for the next few weeks. And let's find out what information we can find out about them. And be a good consumer and ask direct questions. Who is your leader? What is expected if you get involved with it? Because destructive cults lie. It's a very important thing.
And I won't obsess anymore about the Unification Church, which is what I think the church was around the Moonies. But
they didn't use that word, those terms with me. It was one world crusade, because I was Jewish. They weren't going to throw the church word around.
I see. Okay.
They have so many front groups with different names. So they, and big cults do that. They have a lot of different names, a lot of different front groups. But the bottom line is, again, if it's legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. Anyone listening to this, if you're in a group, you can reality test it, but you have to step outside of the frame that they're giving you to say, okay, what's an ethical church like, or an ethical group like? And I have this model, Mark, I call it the BITE model. It looks at behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. In fact, I have a free anonymous survey at bitemodel.com where people can fill out 40 questions about behavior, information, thought, and get a number on my influence continuum of how authoritarian it is. So we're trying to give people a tool to reality test.
Albert, will you put that? Can you put that link underneath this video, please? Give it to us again, please, Steve.
Bitemodel.com, bitemodel.com.
We'll do. I also want to just ask this, because I think this is sort of, Deirdre says all religions are cults of a sort. When does something become a cult, and as opposed to just a system of belief?
Great question. So if you do this survey on this site, you will see my influence continuum, and you'll get a number of how healthy and how unhealthy. And I say there are cults along the entire continuum. So there are cult groups where you're playing bridge all the time, or mahjong, or ping pong, or you love Taylor Swift or whatever, but you have informed consent, you have conscience, you can read whatever you want to read, talk to whoever you want to talk to, and leave without fear, without phobias in your mind, versus the authoritarian one. So healthy religions are about love and truth and compassion and responsible leadership. And the unhealthy groups are basically malignant narcissists who think they're above the law, and pathological liars, and sadistic and revengeful. All the things that I wrote in chapter 3 of The Cult of Trump, where I compared
now
Donald
to the cult.
to Jim Jones and my former cult leader, Moon and Hubbard.
Now to Trump, and it's interesting you put him alongside those. I've seen this a lot, that he's a wannabe Jim Jones. He may be more powerful than Jim Jones because he has the power of government. He seems to have cowed an entire party. They are afraid of him. They also see the opportunity around him for agendas of all sort, political and otherwise, religious agendas, most certainly. Speak to the cult of Trump, please.
Sure. So when my agent asked me to write The Cult of Trump, my first reaction was no way, because I'm not political. I'm a therapist. I help people with human rights. And I didn't want to wade into the political sphere, but I knew he was a malignant narcissist, and I knew that that was a stereotypical profile of all cult leaders. So I started with the assumption that he had a cult of personality and was running his businesses, and people who were under him were just doing whatever his bidding was. But in my research, I learned that there were authoritarian cults who were in the cult of Trump that were influencing him from above, including Putin and a group called The Family, another one called Opus Dei, another group of churches called New Apostolic Reformation and Christian Dominionism. And they were bringing their followers to him. So there are actual authoritarian cults where the leaders claim to be prophets or apostles or source, whatever, enlightened masters who are telling their followers, we're voting for Trump. He's our guy. They're not following Trump per se. They're following their leader saying, we got to follow Trump. And he was framed in the religious sphere as a King Cyrus figure who was a sinner, but he did God's will. And I heard Netanyahu use that terminology, as well as many Christian dominionists talk about Trump as a King Cyrus figure. But in the end, the bottom line is that if you're for human rights, if you're for separation of church and state, if you're for the Constitution, if you're for rule of law, if you're for women's rights and gay rights and indigenous rights, this is not what the cult of Trump is about. It's about authoritarianism and a hierarchy where he wants only true believers who will do what they're told, which is the opposite of what the founders of our country were about: to separate power, to have checks and balances, to have to have a Department of Justice that isn't doing the will of the president. And in my book, I talk about the techniques of how Trump flips reality. And think the Matrix movies, the red pill. You think you know it's real, but everything's the opposite. So it's Hillary who's doing the coup, not him. It's Biden who's the trafficker. No, he's involved with Epstein and Andrew Tate and other traffickers. So reality gets confusing and disorienting. But the good news is, my experience with people is they don't like to be lied to, and they don't like to be exploited and abused. And I think there's going to be a reckoning in the weeks and months ahead where a lot of people realize that they believed his lies and elected someone who's fundamentally opposed to making their lives better.
So that's an interesting narrative that might play out, and I certainly hope it does play out. It's pretty much the only thing I can hope for now because the guy's already in. But I want to ask you, because you are such an authority on cults and this cult of Trump, how that moment happens for so many. I'm sure it happens in different ways, but you say they don't like to be lied to. There's a moment of realization or a period of realization or an event or a series of events. Speak to me how you might see this play out from the standpoint of how that MAGA, it seems such a strong hold that the MAGA world has on this loyalty to Trump, how that might begin to break up. And I would just add one last thing, and then I want to really hear your response, and that is, it is buoyed, I think, or supported by this propaganda machine, which is now, it was Fox News Channel, and then a couple of others, OAN, and sort of these others, the Sean Hannitys of the world, et cetera, who pervert the reality and really lie to the public to support Trump. But then, since Trump's been elected, there's been a cowing of mainstream media, the libs, if you will, who are never really quite as liberal as probably the conservatives thought, but the ABCs, the way they settle the Stephanopoulos thing, the CBS, they're going to settle the 60 Minutes thing. These are just nuisance suits. It's essentially extortion. So what I'm saying is you won't have anyone to report the lies on one level because you see slowly media's being told, hey, guys, don't be too tough on the president. We need to exist as a company. Speak to me how it all might happen in the months to come.
Well, information control is the eye of the bite model. And what people need to understand is we're information processing organisms, and we depend on information that forms our beliefs and our decisions for what we do. And so, and I should say, I've been helping people out of cults way before the internet happened, and I've been studying radicalization online since the internet has happened. And we're faced with a situation now where there's some 5,000 data points on every voting American in the dark web, where they have a profile on Mark Thompson and Stephen Hassan. They know what we liked, what we didn't like, what kind of food we like, what kind of car we drive, what kind of phone we have, etc. And there are algorithms based on these personality profiles that can basically move you more to the left, move you more to the right, make you hopeless, and play video games the rest of your life, or binge watch documentaries, or commit suicide. There are suicide cults. Now there are AIs that have empathy. There was a kid who killed himself because he fell in love with a chatbot on character.ai. So we're living in a new realm with the tech bros. And now Zuckerberg has taken away fact checking from Facebook. So it's going in the opposite direction of planetary survival, in my opinion.
Yeah, but the eye in your bite is getting smaller.
No, the eye is bigger.
All right.
It's more important. And so what people need to understand going forward is experts matter, but they need to be experts in the subject that you're listening to them in. If someone's an expert in Shakespeare, don't listen to them talking about politics. Like, that's not the fit. If you want to talk to someone who's studied hypnosis and brainwashing and mind control, I have the credibility because I've written the books, I've done the peer-reviewed journal articles, I've done my doctorate on that topic. So the point that I'm trying to say for your listeners is, there's hope, but we need to be smart and strategic and correctly identify what's happening. And so I don't know if you're aware of this, but Susie Wiles, who's the chief of staff, was a paid lobbyist for Putin and Xi before she helped Trump win in 2016. So what does that tell us about who's influencing things? And Putin wants, as the Soviet Union fell, he wants America to fall. And there are deliberate chaos agents that are being put in place to dismantle the United States government, to undo our military might because they want more hegemony. They don't want America to be the superpower it always has been. And the question is, there's more than half of the United States who aren't believing in Trump. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to fall in line and be silent, or are we going to speak louder and use whatever power we can use to resist?
This is interesting then. So what you're implying there is that we will be the source of a lot of this information to which you referred. So
absolutely. We need people like you, like me. I have a podcast. We need truth tellers who are committed to facts, that aren't just committed to, black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil thinking, but really understanding reality's complex, and we don't know everything, but we do have facts. And based on certain facts, we are in World War III right now. It's mimetic warfare, psychological warfare. It's being waged over the media, through the social media. And what do we want to do? Do we want to go mindless, or do we want to be mindful and say, wait a minute, I want to live. I want to not have climate catastrophe. I want to not give a green light to undermining all efforts to get off of fossil fuels. I want to undermine big tech from running rampant over us, and emphasizing Mars over planetary survival here on Earth.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just lunacy, and I'll speak about that a little bit later in the show. The Mars thing is utter lunacy. I mean, I'm talking about from a scientific standpoint, it's utter lunacy. What that is pouring money into the pockets of Elon Musk. That's all that is. The radiation alone would be would makes that a fool's
But you
errand.
don't understand, Mark. He thinks he's going to have android bodies and be able to put his consciousness into an android body, because otherwise it takes 35,000 years to get to Mars.
Right.
You got to have an android body that's going to last that long, right? But
yeah, right. I forgot. Thank you.
The bottom line is we need sanity, and we need to think about not silencing ourselves and cowering in fear, but standing up for what's right. And I want to come back to something I heard you say before you introduced me, which is the pardons to Stuart Rhodes and the violent insurrectionists was a slap in the face of every law and order person in the United States, including people who voted for Trump. And that's a very important point to keep emphasizing, that this was a betrayal of the Capitol Police.
Sure.
This is with an utter betrayal, and so we need to wake up and realize, even if we voted for Trump, this is not what we bargained for. We thought something else was going to happen.
I don't mean to press you on this, but a lot of what you've just said, of course, I agree with everything you've just said, but a lot of what you've just said was out there in the campaign. You talked about the fossil fuel thing, and you talked about and even what we've just spoken of, the J6 pardons. He said, I'm going to pardon these people. He said it. I mean, it was absurd. It was gross. It was despicable, but he did say it. And so he has followed through on that. So I guess what I'm getting at is when you say, I think for whatever reason, these aspects of who he is not only isn't enough to break the cult of Trump, it helped enhance the cult of Trump. So back to your expertise, which is this cult, I'm just wondering what information has to enter the magosphere for that to begin to melt, for that support to begin to wane.
So I hear you. You did ask me this question before, and what I can tell you, what I've learned over 5 decades of doing this work, is that what's going to help people the most are family members, friends, coworkers who've had a historical long-term relationship, a warm relationship, that maybe they've cut off contact or blocked because things got too heated. And I've been appealing forever to say, if you want to help your loved one who's a MAGA true believer or a Trumper, you need to be in their life. You need to start warmly. And if you have to apologize for calling them names or blocking them, start there. I said in my latest live stream, I said, congratulate them on winning. You must be very happy you won. So what are you most excited about in the next 100 days? Who of his nominees do you think will do a really good job? Is there anyone that you have concerns about? So you want to get into the details with the specific person you care about, because not everyone's going to react to the same points. And for me, what woke me up was realizing Moon was a liar, even though I thought he was greater than Jesus or Buddha or Moses. When I realized he lied, and he taught me to lie to the outside world and to members, that's what made me go, the bubble burst. But for other people, it could be other things. The key, though, is contact with non-members and with ex-members. So there are many people who have left the MAGA sphere. Some of them are speaking out, and I'd like to see those voices amplified. People coming out of the QAnon rabbit hole, explaining that they understand now that it was a psyop, and that they were watching videos that were propaganda videos designed to hack their minds. But also I'm encouraging anybody who's been in a dictatorship or a mind control authoritarian cult to start sharing their stories, to normalize it, because we want a big exit ramp for people not to be shamed. Well, you didn't listen to me. I told you it was bad. You don't want that. You want to be like, welcome back. Let's build America up better next time and get rid of all this corruption and greed.
You have now touched on, for me anyway, things that could punch through. I feel that there's a lot of noise, and so we have to make noise, those of us who feel certain things, to compete with the other noise that's out there. And the noisiest will be the control of the media, of course, gives you the greatest, amplification to whatever noise you have, and Trump has control of the media. But I like that you've talked about us making noise. But the other thing, and it just hits me here, and I'm kind of just thinking out loud, but you're right. When I see others who came out of the cult talk about their experience and how they have come to a realization, I can watch that for long periods of time, meaning I take that in with a sense of both wonderment and also revelation. Like, wow, listen to this person. They were so deep in with Trump, and now they've come out. They've come out of the swamp, or they've come out of the darkness as we see it. And there's also one other thing, and I'm so grateful for you being here, Stephen Hassan, and I'm going to put a link to the Cult of Trump book underneath this video. And of course,
George Conway wrote the forward to the re-release.
Wow, that's wild. Is that right? That's great.
And I'll just say, I wrote in 2019, if Trump wasn't elected, expect violence. And I quoted Jim Jones. So I got that right. Everything I said has been validated. But please go on, Mark.
Well, the only thing I was going to say to you is something that I see in the comments. And in the comments, people are saying a lot of what we've talked about, like the J6 pardons and this other stuff. Many people who voted for Trump really didn't think he'd do it. They just thought he said it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, a lot of people who are Latinos didn't expect their relatives and their friends are going to get deported. And as they're getting rounded up, they're going to be very upset that they got conned. But again, the key is we want to depolarize. We want to build bridges. And for me, the best thing we can be doing is teaching people how to discern what's real and what's not real, what's true and what's not true. And what I keep hearing about is teaching people how to critically think or how to identify disinformation. But it's a bigger frame that I think is needed, because it's like a mind virus where your computer gets hacked by malware and you don't have access to your own operating system anymore. You can get access again to your operating system, but it's going to take humans to care, to ask you questions where you go back in time before you ever heard of Trump to what did you think of Donald Trump? Because when I ask people, what's your first memory of Donald Trump? They're like, I saw him on The Apprentice. And I say, what do you think? Oh, I thought he was a dickhead. I thought he was a total jerk. I'm like, that's really curious. Tell me how you went from that observation to thinking that he would be a great leader for the United States, and unpacking all of the systematic social influence processes, maybe listening to a congressman or senator, maybe Sean Hannity, maybe Fox News, Rush Limbaugh. But there's a process of how people's minds got hacked. And again, people do come out of the rabbit hole, but we want people back in our lives who we genuinely care about.
This strikes me as a little more complicated here in the last couple of minutes, and I'm just seeing the complexity associated with, for example, the Proud Boys. We'll just pick them because they're kind of the flavor of the month. And they received this pardon. They're a militia. They're armed. They're trained. They have designs on essentially power, right? Power at the hands of weaponry. It's an armed group, and I think a lot of these armed groups are animated by Trump because they now are going to have power, and clearly they have there's no responsibility essentially for what they're doing at this federal level. They're, the pardons tell you everything you know, and I mention that because they're not in a cult per se. They're in a fealty to Trump because it animates their power, right? I see the
I'm not sure if I wouldn't characterize the Proud Boys as a cult, to be honest.
Well, thank you. I mean, I was hoping you'd push back on that a little bit, obviously.
And the Oath Keepers, because there's a pyramid structured authoritarian bent.
So they fall into the category of what you're talking about, which is a bunch of cults that come under the overall umbrella of cultism with MAGA and Trump?
Yeah, exactly. So a key thing is if you're in a healthy group and you decide you don't want to be there anymore, people are still your friends and they stay in touch. But if you're like David Weissman, who I wrote about in The Cult of Trump, who was a self-professed MAGA troll, who then started talking with Sarah Silverman online, who thanked him for his service and asked for his ideas for gun control. And it got him thinking. Everybody turned on him. He was the enemy because he was talking and having a conversation with a liberal comedian. And that turning on him, he was a vet, I should add, woke him up to, wait a minute, these are not my friends. I thought they were my friends, but no, they turned on me. And that's a key variable. If people are going to be your friends no matter what you believe or what you do and still want you in your life, versus people who demonize you as, worthy of being killed or harmed.
Sure. I mean, I think of the ostracization around trying to leave Scientology, for example, or even the Hasidic Jews. I mean, it's again, they don't all rise to the level of, they all rise to different levels, but what you say makes total sense. It tracks that way. Can you leave, essentially, without having to be cut off from your family?
The shunning is one part of it, but the phobia indoctrination, Mark, I talk about understanding a phobia of being in a cult. Like if you have an elevator phobia, you're afraid to get in an elevator because all you can imagine is you'll plummet to your death or you'll be stuck for eternity. You can't imagine pressing a button, riding safely and comfortably and getting out at the floor you want. And when you're coming out of a mind control cult, you need to be able to see a future where you're happy and fulfilled and where things are okay, and not where you're possessed by demons or everybody's coming after you. So it is
So that's why the emphasis on friends and on family, et cetera. Like
Love,
yes.
love, respect, kindness, compassion, active listening. I know that people can learn how to talk to loved ones because I've been teaching people for decades. If they're motivated to learn, if they just want to yell at their loved one in a cult and tell them they're stupid, that's going to keep them in longer. And so why would you do that if you care about the person?
I want to link to your book, The Cult of Trump. It's just one of these books that you've written along the way that shares so much for this time that we have. You know, I mean, you've written other books, and you're just prolific, you know, in your thoughts and in your writings. But this is a book for this moment, The Cult of Trump. A leading cult expert explains how the president uses mind control. Stephen Hassan, PhD, and the foreword by George Conway. I didn't know that. That's terrific. I'm buying 6 of these. I'm committing to that now. 6 of your books. Hardcover is what I have in my house, and I will give them out to friends of mine because I think there's such great information here, and I'm really grateful that you joined us today,
well,
Steve.
Thank
I hope
you
you'll
so
come
much,
again.
Mark. But I do want to warn you, the hardback is without the George Conway.
Oh, my God.
They only re-released the paperback.
All right, so I have to go paperback. I was
I
trying
would
to
go
throw you a couple extra
paperback.
dollars, and I like the hardcover. I'm super old school.
I'm with you. I like hardcover too, but I wanted to be honest and disclose to your listeners. I also read the book, and George read his forward, and I read the afterward to add to the book itself.
Oh, for the audible, for the
audio
book.
people.
That's great.
Yep.
Okay. Well, Albert, we'll link to it, and however you guys want to take it in. I'm really a fan of your stuff and your conversations and your strategies, and I'm hoping that over time we'll begin to see this cult break up because it feels as though it's every bit the cult that you described. So thanks for being here. And hey, mention your podcast too, if you would, please. Because
sure, it's on the Midas Touch Network, and it's called Cult Conversations, The Influence Continuum with Dr. Steve Hassan. And I have a Substack where I have the video and blogs about each guest that I interview. And I try to do positive things and not just, undue influence things as well. So thanks for having me on, Mark.
Of course. We'll do it again, I hope. Thanks, Steve Hassan. Thank you. Salam, my friend.
The Mark Thompson Show.
It was great. I loved it.
How would you handle this? We could try ignoring it, sir.
Morning.
You cannot say you love your country.
Where are my weed smokers at?
Stay at home and get baked.
Thank you all for being here. You can help this show in a way that costs you nothing. Smash that like button.
Smash it with your iron rod.
Smash it with your iron rod, baby. Come on. Smash it. Give me a smash.
Smash it with your iron rod.
Yeah, that's right. I also encourage you to subscribe to this show. If you haven't, it also costs you nothing. And I think we do some good stuff here. We have some good conversations. We get good guests. I think there's some great takes and also a little bit of fun along the way. So please subscribe and please share the show with your friends, on your social media. That helps us grow the show. And I will say this. These are tough times for shows like this. And I say that because you can see already the crushing weight of the new administration on media. There is already a way that we're seeing these businesses, because that's what they are. They're huge companies, right? CBS, Paramount, et cetera. They're already settling on this 60 Minutes lawsuit. That is absolutely a shakedown. I mean, they do the lawsuit about, it was an interview with Kamala Harris, and Trump was offered the interview from 60 Minutes, didn't want to do it. Now there's a lawsuit. It's absurd. Same thing with the George Stephanopoulos lawsuit, which was, again, settled out of court. It was just, easier to write the check than to take on the president of the United States, from whom you're going to try to get regulatory favors, etc. So if you want to do business with the U.S. government right now, you pretty much have to bow to Trump. So it's in that media environment that you're seeing mainstream media already collapsing and bowing to Trump. So how does it affect this show? I'll tell you. These huge media companies, and you've seen it already, you've seen Zuckerberg, you've seen Bezos, you've seen the Google heads who run this show, okay, as part of their huge Google network. You've seen them show up at the inauguration alongside Donald Trump. They had better seats than people who had been in Congress for decades. Things will change in terms of the algorithm in the way in which this show, which represents a certain position, we try to bring you truths, how we show up in your algorithm, in your feed. It's not going to be, forget about my show. My show's a little show. That's why we need subscribers, et cetera. But there are other shows that have millions of subscribers, right? You're going to see them even affected. They're going to be played down. The algorithm will play them down also. Why? Because you want favorability from the king. So I encourage you to share this show. I encourage you to support this show and other shows like it. If you want it, support it. This show also is an audio show. As you know, we talked about the podcast. It goes up across audio platforms from Apple to Google to iHeartMedia and iHeartRadio, etc. So please support the show any way you can. And as I mentioned, smash the like button and do all that stuff that you can do. And thanks for supporting us also financially. I appreciate that very much. In fact,
The Mark Thompson Show.
Tomorrow I've planned a huge orgy of thanks to many of you who have shown up on Patreon and PayPal. Really do appreciate that. If you want to join that community of supporters, it's themarkthompsonshow.com. And there are links to PayPal and also to Patreon on both that website, themarkthompsonshow.com, and also under all our videos. You can find hot links. You can find live links. You can find, what do you call those, Albert? What do you kids call those links that are hot? You call them, don't you have a name for them or something? Don't you have a link? Isn't there a terminology of some kind, Albert? You kids?
It's just, you're correct. Hot link. Yeah.
All right. Very good.
Hyperlink,
Thank you
maybe
very much.
hyperlink.
All right.
Yeah.
We will always support you, Mark. We're not going anywhere, says Trevor Starr in Hollywood. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Big shout out to Trevor Starr.
Big shout out.
Scott Rittenberg says, what Angel said, Mark and Kim and Nikki are the Max Headroom Network. I guess Angel made the comment in the comments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the chat. All y'all need now is a renegade broadcast station in old Winnebago. I know, we do. We need a pirate radio station.
There you go.
The Tony Ladades, thank you for a $10 super chat. He says, just wait until the released J6ers commit new crimes. It will all be on Trump. Yeah, will it? Or, again.
Did you see they invited one of the Oath Keepers back
to
into
Congress.
the Capitol?
Yeah, it's unreal. I mean, it's another level of despicability.
These are people who committed these horrible crimes against the country.
It's true.
I just don't understand.
It's true. It's despicable. The question I have is a question for you now, Albert. It's do I have time for Law and Disorder before Katz? Can I do it? Can we try it?
We could try. It would probably have to be one or two stories because I feel like Katz is going to join any minute now.
Okay.
Albert, thank you.
Let's do it, though. Here is some Law and Disorder.
In the criminal justice system, the people,
pimps, addicts, thieves, bums, winos, girls who can't keep an address, and men who don't care,
are represented by two separate yet equally important groups.
A cop, a flatfoot, a bull, a dick, John Law. You're the fuzz, the heat, you're poison, you're trouble, you're bad news.
These are their stories.
From the That Didn't Take Long department, I have this story for you. The Florida man freed by Trump on the January 6th charges. He, one of all of those people who got that pardon, he gets arrested one day later. He was indicted for assaulting police officers and setting off an explosive device during the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Had his case dismissed after President Trump issued this sweeping pardon for the rioters. But then Daniel Charles Ball, who you see here, age 39, gets arrested 1 day later. He was hit with a slew of federal felony charges, all of which were wiped away. Assaulting, resisting, impeding certain officers with a deadly or dangerous weapon, using fire and explosive to commit a felony, obstruction of law enforcement during a civil disorder. I can go on and on and on, carrying or using a deadly or dangerous weapon. This guy's a bad hombre,
Yeah.
to use the phrase. And he was pardoned. But he was arrested a day later on a gun charge. He, of course, is at his home in Florida, and there in Citrus County, where it probably feels as though nothing bad could happen, he was arrested. Meantime, someone else who was offered the presidential pardon, Pamela Hempill, she served 2 months in prison for her involvement in the Capitol siege over the 2020 election. What did she do? She said, I don't want your pardon, Mr. President.
What?
She said, I broke the law. I know I broke the law. I pleaded guilty, she said, because I was guilty. And we know all of them were guilty, she said. She lives in Idaho, and she is rejecting her pardon from Donald Trump. She says, I'm not going to be part of them trying to rewrite history. That's her in an interview. I'm not going to be part of them trying to rewrite history. Pam Hempill, quite impressive. And then, as Kim says, the Oath Keeper who goes back to the Capitol, Stuart Rhodes, he goes to the Capitol to meet with GOP lawmakers. To apologize? Not so much. He was spotted in the Dunkin' Donuts inside the Longworth House office building. And that's the part of the complex that's accessible to the public. And he says that he was advocating for the release of Jeremy Brown, who's another Oath Keeper who's in prison on federal weapons charges stemming from an investigation into his alleged involvement in the riot. We will have to see. But as Kim said, it's just despicable. And the police union that endorsed Trump, you know, back the blue, Trump seemed as though he was like the law and order guy, do what you want, cops, I'm on your side. That pro-Trump police union is saying that these J6 pardons send a dangerous message. The Fraternal Order of Police, they endorsed Donald Trump in the last 3 elections, say they are, quote, deeply discouraged by his recent pardons. In a joint statement with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, they say that these pardons and computations given by Trump to those who've been convicted of killing or assaulting police are deeply disappointing. They don't make an explicit reference to the J6 pardons, but they issued the statement right after the pardons were handed down.
Even the judges are like, what are you doing? What are you doing?
I will remind you, lest you need reminding, that these were Trump judges. Many of them were Trump judges who presided over these various charges and then the guilty verdicts that were found in all of these different cases. Trump appointed judges. And then, Albert, finally, I wanted to share the reaction of one police officer who was there at the Capitol to the news of these blanket pardons.
This feels like a betrayal to you.
Oh, I have been betrayed by my country. Rest assured, I have been betrayed by my country, and I've been betrayed by those that supported Donald Trump. Whether you voted for him because he promised these pardons or for some other reason, you knew that this was coming, and here we are. Tonight, 6 individuals who assaulted me as I did my job on January 6th, as did hundreds of other law enforcement officers, will now walk free. 6 individuals who have threatened my life and who have made threats towards my family members, as well as countless other January 6th defendants who have threatened me because they see me as a spokesperson for law enforcement for this event. My family, my children, and myself are less safe today because of Donald Trump and his supporters.
When you...
Yeah, that's Michael Fanone. Fanone has taken it hard. I mean, he took a taser to his neck repeatedly, and he was just one of the many officers there who were doing their job, back the blue.
And since then, his family's been put at risk. The threats have rolled in, and these people just got pardons, and they just got access to weapons because some of their felonies have been stripped. So now these violent people can own guns again. These are people, in my mind, who should be stripped of their citizenship for what they did to America, and their citizenship given to migrants who are here and actually want to be part of a democracy. And then they should be set in raggedy old boats with no paddles and directed to, there's an island out there, go try to find it. You're not wanted here anymore. Like, that's how serious and angry I feel about the attack on America. And now they're pardoned and they're welcomed back in our nation's capital.
Well, it's part of a rewriting.
Outrageous.
It's part of a rewriting of J6. I mean, I'm not going to comment on. I mean, I get it. You're angry as you should be, and I think you're right to be angry. I'm not going to speak to the specifics of what you said because people come to this country for a lot of different reasons, not just because they embrace democracy. But I mean, I also feel as though you're right in pointing out the fact that these people tried to derail democracy, and they were part of an all-out, I should say, coup attempt on the part of the president. And there's no question about it. I mean, it took on the violence as the last step in an attempt that had been underway for some time, as Trump had a fake elector scheme that he hatched. He was taking over the Justice Department with his guy who he wanted him just to announce that there's some irregularities with the election. Remember, he said, there doesn't have to be any irregularities. I just need you to announce that there's some questions that we need to investigate. I need the big cloud of doubt over the election. That was essentially what was going on. There'd been talk of martial law. They, of course, went to all of those court cases, et cetera. So the violent J6 crush in Congress, that was the culmination of an ongoing coup attempt. So now he pardons all of these cousters, and they are out there, an armed militia. These are his brown shirts. These militias that are armed, and by the way, can purchase weapons, can have weapons. They wouldn't have that if there was an active felony, but now their record's been purged by the president. They are his enforcers. They intimidate legislators, they intimidate media people, and they intimidate other Americans who disagree. It's a very dangerous time in America, largely as a result of the lawlessness that seems to be wrought by many of these decisions that Trump is making. That's Law and Disorder for today.
Tune in again next time for more Law and Disorder on The Mark Thompson Show.
All right, that's it. Let's roll. Hey, let's be careful out there.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Shadow Stevens. This is The Mark Thompson Show. Keep it to yourself.
Who's Mark Thompson?
Oh, it's our big Thursday show. I love our Thursday show almost as much as I like the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday show. And then there's a moment at which it puts me into another place, and that moment has just arrived, luckily for you. One of the great legal analyst in the English-speaking world, is about to join us. You've heard him on British radio and television, and New Zealand and Australia, across America, on Fox News, on News Nation, on all of the CBS stations in New York, on Fox, in Los Angeles, etc. And he joins us on Thursdays to set us straight on the law. He's the great former federal prosecutor. Now he works the defense side of the table. David Katz, everybody.
Mark, it's great to be with you because we go so in depth, on your show.
I thank you, and I am craving a lot of your takes on what's happening with the law. And we've seen this undermining of decisions that were made to incarcerate or otherwise punish so many of these J6ers, the people who stormed the Capitol and perpetrated violence, and also those who found themselves there in the halls of Congress and they participated in violence to one level or another. Some didn't participate in violence and they got trespassing charges and these kinds of things. But when you see the heads of all of this, I'm talking about the Proud Boys, these clear militia group leaders who did help engineer so much violence and this attempted coup against the country. When you see that just all wiped away with these blanket pardons, I wonder if you could speak to it and put it in some kind of context. There's been blowback, last thing, by judges who were involved with this. There were Trump judges, okay? These are people who Trump appointed who presided over many of these cases. You've seen the police union now break back against it. It was a real, I'm going to use this phrase, balls move on the part of Trump to make this one of his first orders of business, and yet he did say he was going to do it.
Well, it's extraordinarily controversial, even among the usual fans of the Republican Party, like the police unions and so forth. It's really an extraordinary move after using this slogan my entire life, back the blue, law and order, all of those canards of the Republican Party. And this shows that they were utterly wanting in that regard. They didn't stand up for the police who got beaten. So all of this rhetoric for all of these years, he's just made such fools of the Republicans who use that rhetoric against so many other people. And then here is a classic example where it should have been used. Here are people on film, on video, shown to have beaten these police officers. You have 5 dead police officers who would not be dead if it were not for this marauding, this attack on the Capitol by Trump's followers, which Trump instigated. He's also made a fool out of the Vice President, Vance. Of course, Vance will get used to being made a fool of probably weekly, to the extent that he has any credibility or he says anything or he steps out of the shadow of Musk and actually acts like he's the person who's supposed to be second in command of this circus. But he said, no, we'll do a case-by-case analysis. And other people said, oh, no, we'll do a case-by-case study of these. And of course, there was no case-by-case analysis. It was ordered, Mark, en masse as to 1,500 people, all of whom were either convicted or had felony charges pending against them at this time, not having been deemed to worthy of being dismissed by any federal judge. No federal judge, as I understand it, dismissed any of these charges. The reason that these 1,500 people have now been exonerated, have been excused, is because they either got full pardons, that was the great majority of them. They got commutations. That includes people who were leaders of the Proud Boys, leaders of the Oath Keepers, who planned this, who were given multi-decade sentences in these because of the, as I said, 5 people died there. They tried to overturn the election. They tried to take away our transition of power, one of the great jewels, if not the greatest jewel of our democracy, that we have a peaceful transfer of power.
Well, they tried to, and as you say, they tried to beat to death the law enforcement officers who were charged with defending that building.
I mean, Mark, they sprayed bear spray at them, caused huge damage to them, hurt their eyes, hurt their minds.
They tased them. They tased that Fanon multiple times in his neck. I mean, they try. So I'm sorry to, but not to put too fine a point on it, but to put a fine point on it. to what you said, J.D. Vance said, well, we're not, I mean, the violent perpetrators, well, we likely won't be pardoning them, but there are others who are, he kind of put them, these Oath Keeper guys and the ones to whom you've talked about, they got 20 who had 22 years, et cetera, in a separate category. And so did Pam Bondi, his new, appointment for the Justice Department to be the Attorney General. She said, well, violent criminals will likely not be pardoned. But, well, as it turns out, as you said, David, it was blanket.
It was blanket. It was people who committed violent crimes. And of course, one of the consequences of having a criminal conviction, we've talked about things like the Second Chance Act and things like that, to not have so many, deleterious consequences of having a felony conviction. But certainly these people should have some consequences of their felony convictions. And the reality is that all 1,500 of them have no consequences. The pardons and the commutations were structured in such a way, none of these people are even going to have a probation officer. None of them are going to be under community supervision. None are going to have the restrictions that felons normally have over purchasing and using a firearm. This is truly frightening for some of the people who, as you say, you use the expression, Trump's brown shirts. Now, they're not going to get away with the kind of awful things that the brown shirts did in Nazi Germany, because we don't have that kind of totally federal police force that Trump could in any way control, the way Hitler managed to control the forces, and so the brown shirts could attack people, protesters, people they didn't like, Jews, protesters, with impunity. We're not going to have that. And if you think about it, these blue states have to really up their game. It used to be a great thing to have the FBI and federal law enforcement, and that was a big, big deal. Oh my God, this person works for the FBI. In a way that it sort of was not to work for the equivalent state agency, let's say in New York or in California. Well, now it should be. It should be one of the most prestigious, respected jobs to be in law enforcement for the states. And all these states like California need to up their game. They need to do the things that the FBI used to be famous for and may very well cease doing in significant regards under Kash Patel if he ends up being confirmed. And that includes, in a totally lawful way, keeping tabs on people who are dangerous, coming from the extreme right wing. It used to be the police unions cared about anybody who beat up police, anybody who was terrible in the way that they acted toward the police. Now it seems like they've really given a pass. I know they've made some weak protests, but all of these police unions ought to revoke their support of Trump. They ought to say this is a bridge too far. They ought to say we were not just about whether minorities were fighting with the police. We're not just about whether so-called liberals or left-wing protesters. We, the police, mean it. We don't like when anybody beats on us. We don't like when anybody incapacitates us, put us in the hospital, has an encounter with us where 5 police officers end up dead. We really mean it. This is the end of our support for Trump. This was all very funny when he said maybe they ought to beat up the guy in the back of a squad car. Yes, we should have said more then, the police unions, when he talked about, oh, isn't that kind of nice? They beat up a guy in the back of the squad car. But this is a bridge too far. So I hope the police associations do that. I hope the district attorneys associations do that. They're all known as being right-wing, being supposedly law and order. This really should be the end of that whole thing with Trump. They should be completely over Trump after this. This is awful. But I don't think that these people will go as far and do as bad things as people think, because I think that they will be, in a totally lawful way, they will come to the attention of law enforcement very quickly, especially in these blue states. Can they do terrible things in red states and get totally away with it? There is just a sense of police agencies that if someone is up to no good, they really don't look at whether you're a Democrat or Republican. I mean, police agencies, even in red states, if you're up to no good, if you're threatening people, one of the problems with people who get away with things, this has always been like the aim of the criminal sanction. If you let people get away with stuff, the next thing they'll do will be worse. So think about the next thing that some of these 1,500 people do is worse because they feel like they got away with this one.
There's that quote, I forget exactly what it is, but you may remember it. It's, for my loyal followers, they can do what they want. For those who oppose me, the law. It's the monarch's credo, in effect, that you will be loyal to me and I will take care of you. And if you're disloyal, I will have the full weight of the law come down upon you. So there is this asymmetry now, David, that I see it growing. And you're right to point to the states, I think, because that really is where the president won't help you. I mean, if you pull that crap in California or some of these blue states, you're going away for a long time, and President Trump can't be of any help to you.
And people say, well, in 4 years when he won't leave or when Vance won't accept they'll call on these people again and they'll summon them out. It'll be 4 years from now, Mark. Are you with me? And so this idea that there'll be his brown shirts that will come out in 3.5 years from now, a lot's going to happen between now and 3.5 years. There'll be a lot of surveillance on these people. One thing that always kind of surprised me is that the feds don't like to work with the locals. And because the feds don't like to work with the locals, we never did have companion state prosecutions. There really was no reason why a lot of these people couldn't have been simultaneously prosecuted, let's say in Maryland or Virginia, because they stayed in Maryland or Virginia. Acts of the conspiracy were done in Maryland or Virginia. They could have been prosecuted not only in the federal court, but in the state court. And then, of course, they could not have been pardoned. And they would have said, hey, have a nice life. You're going from the D.C. jail to the penitentiary in Maryland, because now you're going to serve the state part of your sentence, because you also got a consecutive state sentence. I don't say this lightly. I'm now a criminal defense attorney, but what these people did was awful, and they need to stop. These people like Trump and his followers need to stop gaslighting us. This is one that we saw on January 6th. We saw this with our own eyes. We saw this on television. We saw this on mobile devices. Over 150 police officers there, guards at the Capitol, were injured. They're still standing by there. Can you imagine what they really think when they see those right-wing Republicans come in there who cowered in fear? They didn't know that they weren't going to be the ones. All these cowards who cowered in fear, all these Republicans, and now they haven't even stood up to Trump when he gave them these pardons. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, what could they do? It's such an absolute power, this pardon power. But the fact that they haven't turned on Trump more is terrible, given that the populace is 60% against this move.
Yeah, that's why.
Right. There are millions and millions of Republicans, just say, who are as horrified by this as I am. And you know what's so funny? I worked with all these folks in the prosecutor's office. I would say, without seeing their registration card, most of them were Republicans. And now, of course, I worked a lot of the time under President Reagan, so I suppose it's not surprising. But many of us were Democrats, like me and now Senator Adam Schiff. But this was always a Republican law and order thing. It was like, don't come to me with all these stories. Don't come to me with this happened to that person in their life. You cannot do these acts. Look at these acts. These acts need to be punished. Well, these acts on January 6th, my Lord, do they need to be punished? And the fact that they've now been treated with this impunity, it is horrible. It is scary. But I don't think that ultimately, it's going to change very much in America. Of course, the people who have disrespect for the law will say, it just shows my disrespect for the law. But I think most people are coming around and saying, this is awful. This is something really terrible that Trump did. And right off the bat, people are against. This is his first major move. I know there's been a lot of other ones, but this was his first major move that really resonated, and people are repulsed by it. So good.
Well, that's why I was speaking to the audacity of it, because the reality is, as you've suggested, most Americans really weren't supporting the J6ers. So for him to lead in his first week with this blanket pardon for the J6ers, it was an audacious move. I mean, it really is. He's really testing his political currency in a lot of the ways to which you've referred. This is a question from CC Ryder, who says the civil suit filed by the Capitol Police is still proceeding, though, through the courts. The judge ruled it cannot be dismissed. Can you speak to that, David, for just an instant? I mean,
civil cases, actually, a president cannot dismiss a civil case. It's between two parties. So he can dismiss criminal cases. The civil cases stand, and any state convictions still stand. There are some of those people who have state criminal matters, so they would go from federal custody to state custody. But unfortunately, most of them were not prosecuted concurrently or simultaneously by the state authorities. One of the ones that still sticks in my craw was Manafort. They should have charged Paul Manafort in state court in New York with so many of the things that he did. They were all garden variety state felonies in New York. They figured, the feds got this one. And so when he got his pardon, Manafort got all sorts of benefits. He not only got out of jail, but my understanding is that he got to keep a lot of his property, which he certainly could have argued was ill-gotten gain.
Sure.
But when his criminal case went down, so did the criminal forfeiture as part of the federal cases. And there was nobody, my understanding, he might have been civilly sued, but I don't think the state of New York ever went after him criminally and civilly in the state courts of New York the way they should have. And they ought to do that. They ought to do that in the future. You know, lessons learned a decade from now, things to look at in your law books.
Well, when you have nothing to do, you can Google Manafort and his daughter, and the daughter turned on him and just sort of describes the, complete depravity that is associated with Paul Manafort and corruption. I mean, he fits right into Trump land. And then and read about the outfits that he was wearing, or I think when they arrested him, or it's this bizarre sort of decadent life with like alligator boots with matching alligator long jacket. It's crazy. When that's for if those of you who want to get on the Paul Manafort deep dive.
Didn't he? By the way, speaking of California, didn't he go on some huge shopping trip in Beverly Hills that never made any sense? Why he wanted hundreds of thousands of dollars of those kind of clothes? It was like, wow, Paul, we never really knew you, did we? But now that we've seen your hundreds of thousands of dollars shopping bill, we sure have a lot of questions. And he apparently had two different brownstone houses in New York City. And anyone from New York City is so envious of someone who has one, but someone who has two and gets to keep them and is Paul Manafort. If that actually happened, talk about outrages.
Oh, my God. He had all that money from the Eastern Bloc countries, or we used to call the Eastern Bloc countries. And then, of course, here.
Ukraine, baby. Ukraine.
Yeah, Ukraine, exactly. The grift was on. Look, there's a lot going on with Donald Trump and the Constitution. He took a pledge to essentially an oath, right, to defend the Constitution. It was part of the inaugural ceremonies that many of us saw. We know that he doesn't really care about that stuff, it wouldn't seem, and witness the fact that he right away wants to take an X-Acto knife to part of the Constitution and cut out the part of birthright citizenship. Can you speak to?
Let me say one thing, Mark. Let me say one thing. Okay, you notice he did not put his hand on the Bible. That has a great deal of meaning for some people, and he didn't want to send the rotunda up in flames, so he did at least not touch the Bible for people who think that's very important. Avoiding a fire in the rotunda. His supporters already set enough fires in the rotunda 4 years ago.
Yeah, there he is taking the oath. Albert's got the picture up now with J.D. Vance looking on, et cetera, as the former President Joe Biden, et cetera. So anyway, there was this all.
By the way, Mark, have you ever seen that many white people all in one place?
Oh my God, it was extraordinary. And then they showed that, where they're looking at it on a monitor, there's like an overflow room, and it's all white faces. It was really like, wow, man, they're just. But I mean, there's really not much to the curtain's been pulled back. There's not much to the act anymore that we don't know. But yeah, you're right. So
birthright citizenship.
Yeah, so birthright citizenship. So again, he takes that oath to the Constitution. Then he, as I suggested, sort of erases part of the Constitution in his first week by executive action. Now, speak to what birthright citizenship is, please, and then speak to the legality associated with this executive order, which I don't think you can executive order your way around the Constitution, can you?
Did I agree to faithfully execute the Constitution and that oath? Wait a second. Right now, right afterwards, I am going to try to eliminate something that is black and white, clear as can be in the Constitution. So this is very interesting. 14th Amendment of birthright citizenship. So after the Civil War, freed slaves, there was a whole question about their citizenship. So this was intended to make it very clear that all of the former slaves, no matter what their condition was, no matter what their parents' conditions were, they were born in the United States. That didn't mean that people who were not former slaves and born in the United States were not citizens. It now means very clearly that everyone born in the United States, whether they're a former slave, whether their parents are legally here or not, everyone born in the United States is clearly under the 14th Amendment a citizen. Now, the only exception is this word under the jurisdiction of the United States, and that had a very specific meaning. It was foreign diplomats. foreign diplomats and their children were not under the jurisdiction of the United States, right? That's pretty clear law. They were under the jurisdiction of their countries because they were foreign diplomats in the United States. And if a child of one of them was born here, no, that child did not automatically. And you might think, wow, they really thought that much about the problem to write that in. But from the history, that's exactly what they were thinking about when they wrote in that statement, under the jurisdiction. So there is no there, Mark. On top of that, this issue came before the Supreme Court in about 1900. There is a decided Supreme Court case, precedent, stare decisis, on this point. And it's absolutely clear. It's a person of Chinese ancestry who was born in the United States. He goes out of the United States and he's not allowed to come back into the United States. And he says, wait a second, I'm a citizen with the same right to travel in and out of the United States as any other citizen. He wins. They say, look, you were born in the United States, you're a citizen. So there is no there. So this is one of those where it's just the bully pulpit. It's just Trump screaming and yelling. It's trying to intimidate people. And I don't think that this has a snowball's chance in hell of winning in the U.S. Supreme Court. Maybe the two votes who will vote for anything crazy, Alito and Thomas. I mean, they're just sort of, they're almost comic relief by now. You have to look at the other seven. But looking at the other seven, maybe Gorsuch, but I see this as 6-3. I think it gets to the U.S. Supreme Court. I think it's important enough. It gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I think at least 6-3. They say, read the text, dummy. Read the text, dummy. It says born in the United States, citizen.
The legal, I leave to you. The political, I take a little crack at once in a while, and I would suggest that the political part of this is what Trump does. He messages. So in this sweeping, outrageous thing that he did, where he's trying to upend this clause in the Constitution, he's sending a signal. It's all signal sending, and as you say, it'll go up, it'll get headlines, it'll be, you know, and you can see that this president tried to do what we, those who want to return America to, you know, Whitesville, whatever it's going to be, to the purity of America. This president tried to do it. He just couldn't upend the. So I think there's a political play there. Ask Katz, says Randy, about how the subject of the jurisdiction statement in the 14th Amendment applies or doesn't apply to people here illegally. Ask Katz how the subject to the jurisdiction statement in the 14th Amendment applies or doesn't apply to people who are here illegally.
Subject to it doesn't. It applies to those foreign diplomats. Again, they're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So, I mean, just take a really clear example. The person who's here illegally in the United States, let's say who's come here, snuck in, or who's overstayed a visa, they're subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. If they speed down the street or they hit somebody, they're going to get arrested, and they're subject to the jurisdiction of the United States or one of its states. That's not true of the foreign diplomat. Remember, the foreign diplomat has immunity for stuff like that. Maybe you kick them out of the country, but you can't even maybe prosecute them for drunken driving or for hitting somebody. So it has no application. I mean, this is just not a real thing. Now, there are some countries that have laws on this. When Trump says, we're the only country in the world that has this, well, first of all, that's not even true. And what's interesting is that some countries like Canada have actually changed their law to give birthright citizenship. One thing about birthright citizenship is it's very easy to administer. And so if you think about it, among other things that would really trouble the U.S. Supreme Court, besides the language, is how incredibly difficult this is to administer. So some people are born here and become what? They don't get a birth certificate. What do they get? They become green card holders. It's awfully difficult to administer. So some countries have actually gone to birthright citizenship because it's very easy to administer. Now, what some other countries do is they do some things that you can at least argue are rational to knock down on birth tourism. Because what you always hear is, oh, it's abused. You don't hear about the 99% something where it works out just fine, but you hear about somebody who comes from China just to give birth, or someone who comes from Latin America. Those are the two that I often hear about the most. And I did have a client once, 20 years ago. And I said, have you ever been here before? Has your wife ever been here before? And he says, she just came here one time, to give birth. And yes, there are people who want to have their child be a U.S. citizen and they come here to give birth. And if you think about it, you can do some rational things to try to prevent that. If somebody's trying to get a tourist visa and they're 7 months pregnant, you can certainly inquire about that. If you have mills that you think are engaging in birth tourism that are bringing people here en masse from some country as a commercial endeavor, fight that really hard. But of course, that's not something Trump ever does. Like you said, it's all about the messaging. It's not about we're going to spend millions of dollars in rational ways to make sure people don't come here as what's basically birth tourism, just so they can come here long enough to have a kid, and the kid will have whatever benefits of being a U.S. citizen, maybe is what they call an anchor baby. I mean, some of that stuff is real. It happens in, I think, relatively small amounts. Some people would have to say it happens in larger amounts. Go deal with that. If Trump wants to deal with something, figure out rational ways to deal with real perceived problems. But this birthright citizenship is, like you say, it's a bumper sticker. It's not a real legal position.
Yeah, he's signaling, but it's a signal and a flag that'll be waved, for a change that he wants, and they'll take it all the way up as they'll continue to wave it all the way to the Supreme Court. So I want to take you to the other side of the political machination of Washington. This is the power of the purse, okay? So Washington is set up so that the president can't just decide what agencies get money and what agencies don't. That way he can't, in a sense, take aim at enemies by cutting off funding for them within the wide expanse of the federal government, except that's exactly what Donald Trump wants to do. He wants to seize that power of the purse from Congress. And this will be a tug of war, won't it, David, with the existing Congress? Because Trump has a lot of power as president, and these executive orders and his directives will be followed in large measure. But when it comes to funding and cutting off funding, that's what he wants to do, is choke off certain programs that he doesn't believe in anymore. That might be a little harder than the president just signing something and making it happen.
Well, I think it's a tug of war that he's going to lose for several reasons. Number one, if Congress cares about anything, it's power of the purse. I mean, the fact that they control the purse strings, that they control spending, that's why the lobbyists all come to them. That's why, they're kings and queens in their little realms and subcommittees where they control funding, because they have an enormous power, this power of the purse. And I don't think they're going to give it up lightly. And they'll see that while, yes, the president will try to impound funds that are going to California, and they'll all chortle because we're a blue state and they're red states, and oh yeah, California just took one. They can readily imagine that once they set a precedent for allowing that, there'll be another Democratic president soon enough, and what goes around comes around. Now, President Nixon tried to do this. This were the famous impoundment cases. I'm old enough to remember reading in college about the impoundment cases of Nixon. Nixon basically lost, that he couldn't impound funds. The argument goes legally that the right to faithfully execute the laws, to faithfully execute spending, is not spend the money, right? Somebody gives you $200 and says, go down the street and spend the money wisely. And your duty to execute the $200 spending is to say, you know what, I don't feel like spending any money, or I don't feel like spending any money at this shop or that shop. That's kind of the analogy of why faithfully execute the laws supposedly means you could faithfully execute the laws to spend money by not spending the money. The courts have said that's really an absurd argument that doesn't have any logic. There's a famous opinion, just a little bit of inside baseball, but Chief Justice Rehnquist, a legendary figure, was Nixon's, what do they call it, Office of Special Counsel. You might wonder who on earth writes these opinions like a president a sitting president can't be prosecuted. Who writes these opinions? Is there some? Yes, there's an office that does that. It's called the Office of Legal Counsel, and some legal genius is usually put in charge of it. And one of those legal geniuses was Rehnquist, who went on to be appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court by Nixon. And he wrote a memo that said that doesn't make any sense. When it says faithfully execute the laws, that doesn't mean you can't spend the money. It means you have to spend the money. So you've got that precedent, you've got you've got that opinion, which has so much prestige. You've got the court's opinions back during the Nixon era. You've got Congress's resistance to anything that cuts back their power of the purse. So I really don't think that this is going to go anywhere. Trump may try it, and it'll be immediately challenged in court. What he'll probably do is decide to not spend money or say he can spend it more cleverly. There may be some little things that he can do, like, if there really is something that makes sense, like someone comes along and says, I know you're entitled to spend 100 billion on this by spending it 50 and 50, and you could actually buy it. You could buy it for 80, right? You could buy twice as much for 80. Yes, maybe you could do that. Say, you know what? I had authority to spend 50 and 50. I spent 80 to buy the same thing because I bought it all at once. Something sensible like that, the courts might approve. But anything more than that, anything that smacks of political retaliation, not spending it in one of the states, it's approved. It's like, remember the infrastructure money? It's as though they'd approve the infrastructure money with all those. They did have some Republican votes for infrastructure. Whether they had some or they didn't have any, it was designated, earmarked to certain places. Biden couldn't have come along and said, I'm only going to spend it in blue states. Now that I have the power to spend it, I'll only spend 60% of it because I'll only spend it in blue states. The other 40% that would have gone to red states, I won't spend that at all. If Trump tries to do anything like that, it's going nowhere, Mark.
Well, you so rightly talk about that impoundment and Nixon, and it was sort of a dead issue, and it doesn't really seem to take the stress test that you've just kind of given us an example of. But the guy who's going to run OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, is the guy who is really one of the key architects of Project 2025. And so this is the political side. Again, just to put some specifics on it, this guy, Russell, it looks like it would be Vought. I think he pronounces his last name Vote. But anyway, it's V-O-U-G-H-T. But so he's trying to get that thing that you're talking about, the notion of preventing the spend, that he essentially, Trump, could be the architect of what areas of government get less in the way of spend, that history of empowerment that you were talking about. He's trying to make that something that is getting into the zeitgeist to the point that becomes a legitimate question again. So even as you say, and game it out for us and say it really probably won't stand any kind of constitutional test or legal test, the word within the Project 2025 people who are really controlling so much of the specifics of the Trump White House right now is, hey, we're going to try to make this happen. We're going to try to get this through. But your point is, I don't care how much buzz there is about it. It just is going to be something that Congress won't want to let go of.
Congress won't want to let go of it. And to the extent that there's a conflict between the president, the executive branch, and Congress, the case will go to the courts. And I think the good thing about this one is that people will have standing. A lot of times they avoid these things when there's administration overreach. No one can quite get to it to challenge it in court because the particular plaintiff doesn't have standing. But I think they'll be standing here because the person who has the funds impounded will have standing. And so when they don't spend it at your store or they don't spend it in your state because it's blue, the person who didn't get the money spent will run to court and say, hey, there's $1 billion hole where Congress appropriated money and Trump didn't give it to me. And I sure as hell have standing. Give me the $1 billion that was appropriated and that Trump didn't spend. So I think that this is kind of, they're doing a lot of these wacky things that are going to be struck down by the courts. I don't care if it's a Trump-picked judge or an Obama or, Bush, Biden-picked judge. There is a legal consensus on a lot of these issues. And I think the ones that you've mentioned so far are going nowhere as a legal matter. And at some point, it's embarrassing to keep losing. Even if you're Trump, it's embarrassing to keep losing. I mean, a lot of us think of him as a big loser who just runs his mouth and then loses and loses and loses. But he's going to have a streak. He's going to be on a losing streak in so many of these. And he'll say it's the liberals, it's the Biden judges, but it won't be. It'll be the judiciary in general, and it'll be Congress standing up for itself, even though both houses are Republican, especially those Republican senators. It's 53-47. They can never get anything past a filibuster there. People who are worried about legislation, they're not going to get anything through the filibuster. The reconciliation process, Mark, is difficult. It has to be really right on point. I know they try to get a parliamentarian, say it's right on point, and they try to push the parliamentarian around. But they all know in the Senate that what goes around comes around. So if you push, in a few years, you have a Democrat and they push back and they cite your precedents and they do to you what you just did to them a couple of years before.
Although the Democrats never really seem to strike back quite as hard. That might change, and maybe Democratic Party 2.0. We'll do that. Kurt asks this: The Mark Thompson Show, aren't executive orders limited by time and must be ratified by Congress to make permanent, or does that only apply to declarations of war since that costs money? Kurt asks.
Well, we haven't had a declaration of war in a while, I think, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the problem, is that we just go to war without the declaration. Yeah.
Yeah. Think Vietnam conflict, the Vietnam conflict. But the question was about executive orders. If an executive order is proper, it becomes law if it's within the scope of the president's executive authority to do something. So it may be delegated, and then the president acts in a way that was delegated to the president. But the president may also overreach and do something that conflicts either with a ruling of a court, or may be something that's not within the president's power, or a congressional statute may say the president can do this, but only this. And the president says, no, I want to do a lot more. And so that's why a lot of these executive orders get challenged. You know, the ones that Biden kept issuing to reduce student debt. And it seemed to me like good ideas. I mean, all these corporations get all these huge breaks. Some poor student kid gets some slack on his or her student loan. But they kept saying it was beyond the president's power. And so they struck down those executive orders in the court. And at least the last word on them by the Supreme Court were some of them, at least according to the majority of the U.S. Supreme Court, were beyond the executive power. So it's not like an executive order stands for 3 months, if but only if Congress joins it. That would be a bill. The executive order, it's good or it's not good because the president had authority. If the president had authority, it's within the authority, then it stands. It's law.
Yeah, it stands alone. I want to, and just another minute or so, David, you're so great to give us your time. He came with this fire hose of executive orders, so you'll pardon, I'm kind of jumping from one to one. But Trump has revoked the executive order banning discrimination in federal contracting. The decades-old order had undermined, quote, our national unity. He, this week, in an executive order that was aimed at banning discrimination by federal contractors and subcontractors as part of, this effort to open up government to sort of equality of hiring and of awarding these contracts. They say, the Trump White House said, that they've signed this order to protect the civil rights of all Americans and expand individual opportunities by terminating radical DEI preferencing in federal contracting and directing federal agencies to relentlessly combat private sector discrimination. They've turned the DEI effort to sort of try to reach out to minority contracts. They've turned that into the notion that by doing that, you're ignoring the mainstream majority, read white people, et cetera, those who might have been neglected by such a thing, that they are kind of being excluded. So again, and then I'll let you speak, the order that he's revoking, okay, just to be clear about what it is, had required, and this is a quote, affirmative action and prohibits federal contractors from discriminating on the basis of race, color, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin. Okay, so this goes back to LBJ, who initially covered government employees, and then it applies to government contracts. Can you speak to this and this executive order and how it may have a practical applicability?
Well, I think it will have some practical applicability, especially if he has all of these Trump loyalists, in these high positions inside these agencies. They certainly will not engage in the DEI efforts that high officials in the Biden administration engaged in. I mean, I just couldn't disagree with Trump, I guess, philosophically more. I was a law clerk to an African-American judge, picked by President Jimmy Carter at the age of 49. And he was totally outstanding. Now, someone could stand on the sidelines and say that, well, he was a DEI pick. I just have no idea what they supposedly mean by that. He was a great judge. He was terrific. He was affirmed by the higher courts all the time. He served a distinguished career. I also worked in 1980 in the office of the Solicitor General in the summer for Wade McCree. Wade McCree was African-American, also picked by Jimmy Carter, but he'd been picked before that as a federal appellate judge. And I think he was originally picked by a Republican. So it just cannot be that every time a woman or a person of color advances that people are screaming, well, they just got it on account of DEI. And the idea of DEI is not to have quotas, but to do outreach and to find outstanding people. And I don't know, maybe because we live out here on the coast, maybe because we have common sense, but this world that Trump and his backers see, where people who are not just as well qualified, women and people of color who are not just as well qualified as males or white people, I just don't see this world happening. But they see this world, and they think it's a zero-sum game, and they think that they think that males and people who are not of color are getting some kind of bad shake, and they're going to try to do something about it. And I guess it's going to end up in the courts. I don't think that they can say somebody was a, quote, DEI hire, and they could take that person who served great at some job for 5 years and somehow demote them or treat them differently, saying they were DEI hire. So I think most of the threat is prospective, to not have as vigorous outreach programs. And I guess anyone who thinks that they are being treated unfairly, they could sue, just like people sue right now, and they say that I was treated unfairly because I was white, because I'm a person of color, because I'm a man or a woman, and they try to make a case why that person has personally been treated unfairly in some way. But we've had this since the Bakke decision. I was at Berkeley, and my Berkeley professors in law school argued for the University of California. They argued against Bakke, who claimed that the University of California had set-asides for minorities, and that but for the 10 places that had been set aside at medical school at a University of California campus for persons of color, that Bakke would have gotten in. And then there were all these great arguments that, wait a second, 10 places were set aside for children of doctors. Why don't you complain about that? But setting aside places for doctors' kids wasn't equal protection, and setting aside places for people of color, if that's what they were doing, and they were really quotas. And that's the famous case where the U.S. Supreme Court said you can't have quotas, but you can do things to have a more diverse student population or have a more diverse workforce. And, we've had these huge fights, and there's thousands and thousands of lawsuits about that ever since.
Sure. I mean, that's like, then I'll know it when I see it type thing, or with the discrimination. D. Elliott says, but David, they are already doing that, putting all the DEI hires on leave before firing them. That was something that was just done yesterday, in the last 36 hours, I think.
They'll probably be at court in the next 36 hours. One thing that was really interesting, just tell a little personal history, but I think it's really relevant here. I was a law clerk from 1980 to late 81, which meant that I was in Washington, D.C., working for a Carter-picked U.S. district judge when Reagan came to power. And our court and all the other courts in Washington, D.C., U.S. district courts, the federal courts, had a huge number of lawsuits. They had what they called reduction in force under Reagan. Reagan had said that he would get rid of the education department. He said he'd get rid of some other department. And he started having these reductions in force, which were called RIFs. And so these workers came in, these federal employees who'd been RIFed, and they came in and they asked for injunctions, and they said that they shouldn't be treated just the way Trump is treating these people. So they'll get good representation. They have federal employee unions that will be litigating these issues. And we'll as Trump says, we'll see.
Trevor Starr in Hollywood says, MAGA loves the new DEI, discrimination, exclusionism, and insidiousness. That's right. And that's impressive. And
you put idiocy in there sometimes.
I think there's going to be
idiocy.
Exclusionism, I think, is a new word too. I don't believe it exists, but I might be wrong about that. I mean, it's possible.
Google it.
I don't know. It could be.
You don't have your ding. You don't have your ding anymore, Mark.
I don't. I've been laying off the ding. I got a little grief about the ding. I don't like the ding. It's too much. So we do it from time to time. It's as a reminder. But you're right. I don't.
To not have the ding, it's like William F. Buckley firing line. It's such an intellectual interchange without the ding.
and then to have the ding come in.
With the ding. It's fun with the ding. William F. Buckley and Gore Vidal would have liked it more if they'd had a ding. When you saw William F. Buckley's firing line when I was a kid, you not only got a great exchange about the issues of the day, but you had 3 or 4 words to look up afterwards.
It was terrific. It really was true. I still look at the YouTube videos of Vidal and Buckley, and it's wonderful. So, David, we've reached the end of our time. I love what we covered, and I know that there's way more to cover. You know, when you have a lawless administration, it's good to have a lawyer to kind of point it out. And I appreciate this is. I'm just trying to see if there's any last comment.
Mark, let me tell you while you're looking.
Yeah,
When I was on
please.
CNN, when I was on CNN's newsroom a lot in 18 and 19, people used to say, you know, when Trump goes, your whole circus is going to go. And I said, you know what? If Trump will sign that he'll go, I'll sign that I'll go. I'll sign that if Trump will go, the Katz circus will go. Well, Trump never went anywhere. I never went anywhere. But it really is deja vu all over again to have
It is.
Trump.
This deja vu is even harder. I mean,
astonishing. It's really mind blowing.
Yeah. Okay. Randy says, please clarify. Okay, I'll clarify. The DEI hires, if there are such things, he says, are not being put on leave. It's the people that work in the DEI offices that are being put on leave. Yeah, they're government offices. There's a government office of DEI that essentially is trying to see to it that the American government respects DEI, and I guess that's the sort of work they do. So diversity, equity, inclusion should be part of the ethic and the philosophy that underpins the federal government. There's an office to that. Well, Trump said, "Great, you're all going home. We're still paying you. We're going to figure out what happens with your office." So, DK rocks. David Katz. Let me just get through the compliments, please. K Plant says that. Kurt gives you the applause. You have a lot of love in our audience, David Katz, so thank you. Now, what were you going to say?
I say it's great to be on with you. You know, apparently Trump is keeping almost none, maybe none, of the U.S. attorneys, which is ironic because the offices will be run by the deep state, the career guys after all of the politically appointed U.S. attorneys in the 94 districts are gone. But I'm going this afternoon to the going away party for the U.S. attorney in the Central District of California, my old office. And he's done a wonderful job in so many ways, but that's it. They're going to be new U.S. attorneys. The only good news is that Adam Schiff is on the committee. So if there are real turkeys in there, I hope Schiff will get to the bottom of that, just like if there are real turkeys among the judge picks, Schiff will be on that Judiciary Committee to get to the bottom of it. I know they don't have the votes, but they can bring a lot of things to light.
There is this to button out with this. Trevor Starr in Hollywood did go to Wikipedia. He did Google it. And exclusionism is the political ideology and practice of excluding people from the community, especially in the context of ethnic nationalism, racism, or xenophobia. So I stand corrected. And Trevor, bravo. Very, very well done with exclusionism is an actual word and an actual philosophy. There you go. David, that Constitution is going to be getting a real workout in the next week. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks, David Katz. Appreciate it.
Got to keep your Constitution right in your pocket. Got to keep your little copy of the Constitution right in your pocket. You remember that guy from the Democratic Convention?
Oh, yeah. Trump insulted his son, and he went to his son had given his life for the country. It's crazy.
Great to be with you, Mark. Hi,
Wild
Kim.
times. Yep. All right, David. See you next week.
Do you feel it? It's the Mark Thompson Show.
This is Mark Thompson.
David Katz is such a brother, such a great member of our regular group of people who come through here and offer such great takes. We still got a lot of show left, don't we, everybody?
What?
This is Kim right now, inside her mind. Can we wrap this up so I can go do my show?
Well, it's 1:05. I mean, you know.
All right. I'm just going to go 20 more minutes. Now, Mark and team. I'm only kidding. Angel in the Bay Area writes, Mark and team, Dr. Hassan explained why I support the exiles from the get-go. We need you and the team. Yeah, this is the KGO Exiles is what Angel in the Bay Area is talking about. This show was born from a radio station called KGO. It doesn't exist anymore. And we took the show, we brought it here. So really, we called it KGO in Exile at the very beginning. And that's what Angel in the Bay Area is talking about. It's really great to have everybody's support. And, you know, we have to expand beyond just that small community that we had. a lot of those people didn't come over. I mean, honestly, we had a massive audience in the Bay Area, and a lot of them don't even know that we exist here on YouTube and across the podcast universe. So thank you for sharing the word and getting it out there. Romania Animal Rescue, Inc. How about a super sticker for $20? And a big shout out to you, Romania Animal Rescue, Inc. Your work is so good, and you know how I feel about animals around the globe, and the world of animal rescue is one of the ways in which we can make a difference as humans. So cool to have Romania Animal Rescue, Inc. regularly looking in on us, and they're very generous over there with their support of the show. I love poodles with a super sticker for $19.99. Big shout out. Very impressive. Getting this flurry of support. Makes me weak-kneed to see the kind of love and support. Debbie, with a $5 super chat, says, I sat through a similar meeting while living in Yellowstone
National Park
when the Church Universal Triumphant moved in next door to the park. It's still there.
Wow.
I don't know that Church Universal Triumphant. Do you know that, Kim?
No, some type of cult, likely.
Clearly, yeah. We had a great conversation with Stephen Hassan in the first hour. If you missed it, do check it out on the podcast, and we'll also drop it as a separate video. Marilyn G., thank you for the super sticker for $1.99. Appreciate that. I'm with D, says Luis. Queen of Kindness, a.k.a. Kim. Those dudes should be set adrift in shark-infested waters. Sayonara,
suckers. You're out.
It's funny. Yeah, yep. Kim does not like
Sayonara, sucker.
She feels, and I think it's a fair take, that those J6ers who are pardoned, these violent criminals, some of them, I mean, really bad dudes, that they would be able to walk away scot-free is, it's offensive. It's offensive to morality. It's offensive to ethics. It's offensive to the country and what it was built upon. It's despicable. So I think we're all on the same page on that. Jan says CNN fired Jim Acosta. That makes Donald Trump happy. He won again. Yeah, that was a huge, huge thing that CNN did. And I'll tell you something, because, I always like to be honest with you, the audience. I had set aside a pretty heavily developed part of the show to talk about media and the way media is caving to Trump and what's happening. And the Acosta thing is huge. And it's just one of the things that's happening at CNN. And CNN is just one of the things that's happening across the media landscape to kowtow and kiss up to Donald Trump. It's a remarkable thing. I hate CNN now, says Deirdre Lozica. And then that's the other thing. Then we are repulsed by what's happening, and we decide we want nothing to do with them, and we're running out of places to go because you saw ABC News settle in the George Stephanopoulos case that they obviously would have won. You've just seen CBS television settle in the 60 Minutes case. These are shakedowns. This is a grift, and it's also a way in which Trump can establish, hey, you'll play ball with me. You'll be loyal to me. You will not take me on at any of your news outlets and any of your newscasts, or I will sue you and I will bring the strength of the federal government down upon you. And there is, to that point, word just today that Trump wants to go after MSNBC. Isn't that what he had said, Kim? I believe he wants to turn the FCC on NBC. His new FCC head is talking about going after, I believe it was NBC. Am I wrong? No help?
They are reviving complaints against NBC, ABC, and CBS over Trump bias.
There you go. Over a Trump bias. I mean, it's crazy. So the new FCC chair revives complaints against those outlets that Kim mentioned, NBC, ABC, CBS. They, even if they did have demonstrable bias against Donald Trump, First Amendment should give them coverage. But that's not the point. The point of this entire effort on the part of the FCC commissioner is that they're going to shake you down, ABC, NBC, CBS. We're going to vilify you. We're going to talk about you as anti-Trump organizations. MAGA world is going to turn on you, and we're going to create the stink around you. And perhaps most importantly to all these organizations, we're going to look for ways to mess with you. They may be regulatory things that we do that mess with you, right? There are licenses that are afforded all the NBC, ABC, and CBS stations across America. Maybe we'll mess with your licenses. Maybe we'll sue you on the part of the federal government against NBC, ABC, CBS. So it doesn't matter whether you want to claim First Amendment and whether you're legally able to do it or not. In other words, you're able to say whatever you want, provide whatever coverage you want, be as rough on the president as you want. But that's not going to matter because we're going to make your life as an organization and corporation, this is the point, so rough that stockholders are going to say, hey, back off. It's costing us money. And that's already happening across media. It's happening at CNN. There are literal memos that are going out saying we need to be less, we need to not be the zealotry that is reflected in some of our coverage has to be turned down. We have to try to be, to engage the new administration in a way that we haven't before. It's kind of couched in verbiage like that. I have the memos and I can go into it tomorrow. But the point is that you're seeing one of the key parts of an authoritarian regime take hold, and that is control of the media, control of the information. That's why I think what we do on YouTube and across the podcast universe, and there are certainly other examples of others who do it as well, I think it's very important. And so I hope that we can continue to do it for a while. MSNBC anchors are making a huge show of saying that they won't fold. Okay, well, we'll see. I mean, they may not have the option. They may be dumped. I mean, you've already seen, I'll remind you, Comcast, they dumped MSNBC. They didn't want any part of it. They've spun them off as a separate company, and the reason for that is because they want clean business done, regulatory business and government business done with this new Trump administration. They don't want it clouded by Rachel Maddow's latest rant. So Peter Newton says, this is my first news show of the week. Been ignoring for Jaden Daniels, and a first since I was a senior in high school. My team, my only joy. This is wild, Commissioner. What Peter is saying refers to, of course, the Commanders and their ride into the NFC Championship. Isn't that what he's saying? Is Albert's out walking the dog right now? All right. Yeah. Well, look, the important thing is that we will talk tomorrow. Albert, isn't that Jaden Daniels? Isn't he the phenom?
The Commanders, yep, the phenom out of LSU. He's the hope for the Washington football team.
And they're playing against a very tough Eagles team this weekend. You are the commissioner. Will you tomorrow share your, I think it's too early, but I want you to share tomorrow maybe your forecast for the outcome of these playoff games?
I have my tinfoil cap on. I'm just hoping that the Chiefs don't win. That's all I'm.
Yeah, Albert does not want to see any more Chiefs in there. The Chiefs play the Bills, who I love. So this is enemy. I will look forward to your forecast on the championship weekend. Tomorrow we'll have the commissioner's official forecast.
The Mark Thompson Show.
As foretold in the book, the commissioner's forecast is on the Friday before the championship games. If only Kim had a show of her own, you're saying. Yes, well, you're in luck. She does.
Subscribe.
Yes, she actually has.
What?
I know, she has a show of her own. She's unimpeded by me. No one to stand in her way. You get to enjoy her without somebody like me interrupting her all the time, going, well, it's kind of a good point you make, but actually, you don't have any of that on her show. It's all just the magic of Kim. So drink it in over on the After Party Live now. Meantime, tomorrow, Michael Schur returns, everybody. I know you loved him as host. You'll love him even more as a pundit. He'll be through Friday Fabulous Florida and Snyder the Culture Blaster.
I'm Shadow Stevens for the Mark Thompson Show.
My Shadow.
Bye-bye.
Yes. Hang in there, everyone.
Out of time. Bye-bye.
We will hang in too. After party next. Until tomorrow, thank you and bye-bye.